First, though, the NFIB recently released its February Small Business Optimism Index, which reported higher sales and less uncertainty last month. Joining me now with more is Holly Wade. She's Executive Director of NFIB Research Center. Holly, great to see you this morning. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
What were your takeaways from this report?
So in the latest report in February, our February data in surveying small business owners, we did see the second month of deterioration of optimism. So it ticked down 0.5 point. And we're edging closer to that 52-year average of 98. So this month or last month in February, we saw a deterioration in sales expectations. So fewer small business owners are expecting sales to improve over the next quarter. And that was the dominant kind of heavy hitter in the components within the index that we saw a decline. And so, fewer small business owners are optimistic about sales expectations, at least in the short term. And, but, everything outside of that seemed to be fairly stable. So that was a good sign.
What were some of the factors that caused them to respond in the way that they did during this survey?
So some of the factors, this was before the survey was conducted, before the oil spike in costs, gasoline spike. So that was largely not a factor in their sentiment this last month. But, if you were feeling optimistic about business conditions moving forward, a number of them are still feeling inflation pressures, regulatory pressures, tax pressures. But when looking at the employment situation, compensation pressures are still a really significant challenge for many small business owners. And last month, we saw a number of comments in our comments section related to health insurance costs. So health insurance costs are still an issue for many small business owners, and in trying to mitigate kind of compensation pressures and in attracting applicants for those still many open positions in certain industries. And, that's really one of the major pain points for a lot of small business owners in operating their firm.
Yeah, of course, we'll get several reads on inflation this week, the Consumer Price Index tomorrow, which could indicate some of those service costs perhaps related to inflation for consumers, as well as the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, a little bit later during the week. Just want to touch base, Holly. Obviously, things have changed. There's now a conflict, an escalated conflict in the Middle East, even though the president did indicate yesterday that it could end sooner than previously expected. Historically, how has that impacted the sentiment of small business owners?
Yeah, so gasoline prices for many small business owners is a significant input cost in operating their firm. So in previous times of higher gasoline prices, oil spikes, we have seen a deterioration in small business owners feeling that business conditions are supportive. Inflation pressures will, increase for many of them in trying to absorb those higher energy costs. And, for some of them that either have large fleets or deliveries or, that's one of their biggest input costs, they're going to have to try and figure out how to absorb those higher prices into their business. And, that's been one of the areas of concern for many small business owners over the last 4 years.
In terms of where we go from here, that'll be in focus, but are there any seasonals at play? Do we historically see sentiment trend in one direction around this time of year?
So we do seasonally adjust our data, so that should largely be taken care of. One other area that we did see some deterioration is investment in their business. So whether that is they're holding on to more cash in light of uncertainty related to business conditions, or some inflation pressures that they're still feeling or anticipating. And some of them might be, kind of holding off and staying on the sidelines, waiting for possibly lower interest rates for borrowing costs. in those opportunities that they might have, in the future in investing in their business.
I did see, you mentioned obviously their sales sentiment improved and labor quality seemed to improve as well. What about labor quality changed and why?
So it's two sides of the coin. Some small business owners, it's a supply side issue. Others, it's a demand side issue for our flattening of kind of the labor situation. But compensation pressures and unfilled job openings are still above the 52-year average. And so the labor market for small business is still relatively tight, especially for those industries that are labor heavy, like construction. For construction industry businesses, they're still having a really hard time in filling those positions and taking advantage of sales opportunities.
All right, Holly Wade, Executive Director of NFIB Research Center. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everyone.